it's really important as a leader and as a lover to know yourself deeply first. Because when you're running from parts of yourself, when you're hiding from parts of yourself, when there's things in there that you just don't want to look at, you're standing on shifting sand. When we are deeply intimate with ourselves, only then can we cultivate the type of intimacy with the other that I think a lot of us yearn for, where we feel deeply seen and held, where we are able to deeply see and hold another person in all aspects of themselves, and where, from a sacred sexuality perspective, we can enjoy this kind of intensely pleasurable, expansive, transformative, transcendent lovemaking that can really blow your whole world open. I'm Madeline Eliza. Join me to explore female power, embodied leadership, sensuality and spirituality as we weave together ancient and modern, the scientific and the mythic, the erotic and the divine. Welcome to the show, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about one of my all-time favorite topics, vulnerability. Now, vulnerability, when you learn to use it and to contain it, becomes your absolute superpower. And this is true in leadership, it's true in art and as an artist, and in creativity and creative pursuits in general, and it's also true in intimate relationships. So I'm going to meld all three of these things together because I'm interested in exploring all three areas, and I think how you do one thing in life is generally how you do everything. So when we learn to leverage this incredible skill of vulnerability, it has really transformative results, not only in the teams that we lead, but in our intimate relationships and in the art that we're able to create in the world. So I started out my career as a creative. I actually really wanted to be an actress, and vulnerability has become a superpower for me. It's something that I have trained myself in. I've done many theatre shows. I've done short films. I've done musicals. I once performed Shakespeare for British royalty, actually, which was a bit of a highlight. I played Rosalind in As You Like It. And in all of this performance training and practice, I really learned the power of my own vulnerability. Everybody thinks that acting is about putting on masks, and characterization certainly is very important, and it's what we remember about those really incredible performances often is how the actor disappears. But there's two poles to this, because in an extraordinary performance, not only does the actor disappear into the character, they also reveal their deepest truths as a human being. And good actors and performances that really move you to tears or move you to rage or move you in whichever way and touch you emotionally and touch your soul, what that actor is able to do is to go into the depths of their own soul and excavate like little gems of truth, of universal human truth, and hold these gems up to an audience. And in looking at and feeling and touching those gems, the audience plugs right into their shared humanity. And this is true of musicians and other art forms as well. It's true when you stand in an art gallery in front of a piece that just moves you so deeply. The process is the same of that artist going within, excavating their own inner world and revealing these jewels of truth, of shared humanity. I've been really fascinated with this through various creative pursuits that I've played with, and I've kind of carried this across into my leadership roles, and it's incredibly powerful there as well. And we'll touch on that more deeply in a moment. But while we're on the topic of art, one other thread that I wanted to pull in is the work of the philosopher Heidegger, who was working in the 20th century. And he really reinvigorated this term alethea, which is an ancient Greek term. And it means loosely truth. That was the original kind of meaning of the word. Alethea was a daughter of Zeus, I believe, and she's equated to the Roman goddess Veritas, who's the goddess of truth. But in Heidegger's work, the translation of alethea isn't truth exactly. It's more like unconcealedness or revealing or disclosure. It's this process of removing blocks or removing layers to reveal the truth that lies underneath that may have been obscured to us. And I first heard this term when I was at university, and it struck me on such a deep, resonant level, because I thought, this is the journey that I'm on with myself, because I'd had this fairly turbulent adolescence and early 20s period, struggling with obsessive compulsive disorder and all of the challenges that came with that, and feeling restricted by that. And I felt like I've been on this journey to pull back the layers of conditioning, the layers of contraction. This relates to anybody who's experienced trauma of any kind as well. You know, our system can develop coping mechanisms that are not always in our best interests long term. We get into survival mode, and when we run these programs that kept us safe maybe when we were small, and as adults it can take a long time to crack those layers open and get at that truth that's inside, and reveal that and bring it into the light, out of the darkness and into the light. So this term really resonated with me, and Heidegger did a lot of work theorizing about art and artistic practice. And he believed that art was a mode of meaning making, not just the artist making meaning that the viewer or the reader would passively consume, but that we created joint and shared meaning together in the process of sharing art. And I think this is so relevant right now when we move into this age of AI, and the ability to create shared meaning and to touch our shared humanity through the creative process, through producing and consuming art and communing together in this space, feels like something that is really important for us to hold on to as a collective, as a human collective. This is what differentiates human man from machine, which sets us apart from AI. It's the human soul at the core of it all. And so I'm really interested in exploring these concepts more deeply. I also want to talk about vulnerability as it relates to leadership. If we look back at how leadership has been construed over the past 100 years. In fact, when I say leadership, you might imagine, I had this conversation with a friend recently, and she said, oh, when you say leadership, I just get a picture of a man in a suit in a boardroom, like the mid-century male breadwinner model, Don Draper, if you like, from Mad Men, a guy in a suit who's totally repressed all his emotions, but he's doing the thing and he's in charge and he's running the ship. And it's a leadership paradigm based on masculine qualities, but often kind of distorted rather than healthy masculine qualities, qualities like competition, aggression, ruthlessness, control, logic, and discipline, which can be really positive masculine traits. It's not all negative, but it's a very masculine paradigm. And there's no space for the emotional. There's no space for the body there. This is also really informed by our kind of philosophical underpinnings of Western society. We've had this rationalist model of thinking for the last 400 years where the brain is in charge, the brain is smart, the body is kind of dumb, just following along like a meat suit, following along the instructions of the brain. And we now know that's not the case. And this is why embodiment is so important, which I'll talk about in more depth in another episode. To get back to the subject at hand around vulnerability, we've had this model of leadership which completely denies any place for vulnerability. That would have been weak and soft and disempowering, right? In that kind of patriarchal model of leadership. Over the last 15 to 20 years, there has been an explosion of research, often led by women, really proving out the role that vulnerability has to play in leadership. So you're probably familiar with Brene Brown's work. She's really a lighthouse thinker in this area, drawing the parallel between courage and vulnerability. She defines vulnerability as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure, and really brings it forward as an essential trait for good leaders to cultivate in themselves and in their teams. There's another amazing writer, thinker, professor, Amy Edmondson, who is at Harvard Business School, and she's written extensively on this subject as well. She actually coined the term psychological safety, which has been proven to be the number one trait of high-performing teams. And again, I'll explore this in more detail in another podcast. And you can explore this in more detail as well in the free training that I've got on my website called The De-Armored Leader. We go into these topics in a bit more detail as they relate to leadership specifically. That's at madelineeliza.com/leader. It's a completely free 3-part training for you. And there's another writer, Angela Duckworth, who wrote a book called Grit. And this is not about emotional intelligence. So we know that IQ is important. That's what the patriarchal model of leadership was all about, IQ. Vulnerability and psychological safety, and these topics kind of fit under the banner of emotional intelligence, which has been proven to be extremely important as a leadership skill. And then there's also EQ, emotional quotient. So you've got IQ, intellectual quotient, EQ, emotional quotient. And the third one, which I want to just draw your attention to, if you haven't heard of this term before, is AQ, or adversity quotient. Angela Duckworth wrote a fabulous book called Grit. There's a whole body of thinking on why this is essential for high-performing teams as well. I have really witnessed this firsthand. And again, we'll talk more about that over the course of the show. But for today, I'm going to bring it back to EQ, emotional quotient. So there's quite a lot of research from really reputable organizations like Harvard Business School and Gallup proving out the importance of emotional intelligence for leaders and for high-performing teams. So 71% of employers will hire a candidate with high emotional intelligence over one who may have the same skill set or a better technical skill set but less high emotional intelligence. It's given preferential treatment. Organizations where the leadership team has high emotional intelligence have 41% lower turnover, because when you're emotionally intelligent, you're able to build relationships, of course, more strongly with your team. I really witnessed this at Tripadil. We were under extraordinary pressure. All of these statistics become more crucial if you're working in an organization of rapid growth or change where everybody is under immense pressure most of the time. The ability to stay connected with your team, to build tight relationships of trust and vulnerability, these are all really important in order to be able to keep that team on board, retained in the organization, and fully bought in and committed to the vision, so that you can pull the extraordinary out of your team in order to achieve the vision that you've got for the business. We also see that 90% of top performers around the world are deemed to have high emotional intelligence. So it's really worth cultivating. It's not just about having a nice, soft and fluffy time with your team and everybody getting along well. It actually drives results. So as a leader, this is something that I think it's really worth paying attention to. As I said, I'll dive into more detail on the role of vulnerability in leadership in the free training on my website. I'll link it up in the show notes as well if you want to go deeper into that. There's a lot of really interesting research here to explore, and some great practices that you can do with yourself and with your team. So the third area where I really want to talk about the power of vulnerability is in intimate relating. And I mostly talk about leadership in my work, but I really believe, as I said at the start of this episode, that how you do one thing is how you do everything. And I'm all for an integrated vision of womanhood where not only are we fulfilling our highest potential as leaders, we're also living really deeply nourishing personal lives, intimate lives, sensual lives. We're also deeply involved in our art making, whatever that means for us, having that field of creative expression and self-expression where we're kind of uninhibited and able to deeply excavate our own souls and our own experience to bring forth whatever jewels are there for the world at large. And this might mean your home or your family, like art making, your garden, the cooking that you do. Art making can take lots of different forms, but I think it's really important for all of us to have those creative outlets where we can bring that forward. In terms of intimacy, vulnerability is such a foundational skill. And I think a lot of people talk about intimacy as in two people being intimate with one another. But in order to reach the depths and the transcendent heights of intimacy with another person, you need to first become truly intimate with yourself. And I'm not just talking about self-pleasure, although that can certainly play a role, but really excavating all of the blocks and shadows in yourself. It was Socrates, I believe, who initially said, first, know thyself. And self-intimacy is, in my opinion, foundational to doing everything well in life. This is living an examined life, right? Where we've really looked at ourselves. We've really taken stock. We've taken responsibility for the things that we need to take responsibility for. We're committed to growth. And we're also committed to our own desires and our own highest timeline, to stepping into our dharma and spreading our wings and finding our fullest expression. All of these things go together. When you do one, you do all of it. You can't compartmentalize it out and just, I want to walk the path of my dharma. I really want to be in my fullest expression, but I don't want to look at any of those shadows. Like, it doesn't work like that. They're two halves of the whole. So self-intimacy comes first. I think Jung's work on the shadow is really informative here. I've done a hell of a lot of therapy. You probably have too. I think most of us, working through our childhood woundings and limitations, whatever form that takes, have done quite a lot of therapy now. If we're on this path of kind of self-discovery and self-actualization, there's lots of different tools that you can take in order to land in this foundation of self-intimacy. But it's really important as a leader and as a lover to know yourself deeply first. Because when you're running from parts of yourself, when you're hiding from parts of yourself, when there's things in there that you just don't want to look at, you're standing on shifting sand. If you're interested in power, and I'm interested in power, not because I'm a megalomaniac, but because I can see that our world is teetering on the verge of numerous crises, and I want to contribute in the biggest, brightest way that I can. And so I'm interested in cultivating and harnessing my own personal power. And so therefore I'm interested in self-intimacy and in moving through those shadows and blocks and limitations, so that there's nothing in myself and my own experience that frightens me anymore. There's nothing that's unknown to me. I've lifted all the rocks and had a good hard look underneath and worked through whatever's there to be worked through. Turning to intimacy with the other, and I am using a feminine, masculine, heteronormative, cisgender binary here, so apologies if that offends anyone, but in the interests of the polarity work that I'm doing, also speaking from my own embodied experience as a heterosexual woman, I'm going to be operating within that paradigm. When we are deeply intimate with ourselves, only then can we cultivate the type of intimacy with the other that I think a lot of us yearn for, where we feel deeply seen and held, where we are able to deeply see and hold another person in all aspects of themselves, and where, from a sacred sexuality perspective, we can enjoy this kind of intensely pleasurable, expansive, transformative, transcendent lovemaking that can really blow your whole world open. If we're hiding from parts of ourselves and operating in fear and shame and whatever kind of old patterns are there, it's really hard to get to that space. I'm interested in unraveling these dynamics between men and women in sexual intimacy, particularly because I think it relates back to feminism. So to go to the neoliberal feminist model of thought, where we can do everything that men can do, we're all atomized, we're totally individualistic, it's every woman for herself. And by the way, I'm a divorced mother of two. I have had to lean into this paradigm of like, I can hold it all, I can do it all, because I have to. And as I've shared, I have cultivated a very strong inner masculine as a result of that. But I've also cultivated a very strong inner feminine, and vulnerability is the key to this. We women have more power than we think. Feminism is basically a victimhood model as it stands right now. And I don't say that to discard the incredible work that has been done by so many amazing women over the last 120 years. I enjoy the privileges and the opportunities that I enjoy today because of the blood, sweat, and tears of the women that have come before me. So not for 1 second do I want to denigrate feminism. That's happening a bit now, and I think that's problematic. It's very binary. Whichever side of the fence people stand on, they're sort of throwing rocks at the other side. And I think we need to take a more nuanced perspective. So I'm very grateful for the advances of feminism. I firmly believe in a lot of things that feminism stands for. Women deserve to feel safe. Women deserve to be able to earn the same pay for the same work. Women deserve to be able to choose who they marry and to not be brutalized in the way that women still are in many places around the world. However, I think for like the Western white feminist neoliberal model, especially in the wake of Me Too, feminism is coming from a place of victimhood where we're saying to men, look what you've done wrong. And most men are saying, shit, I'm sorry. Like most men are wanting to do the right thing now, but it's like we can't let it go. And we're still saying, look what you did wrong. Your masculinity is toxic. We have this incredible power as women in our receptivity to the masculine. And this is an idea that I'm grappling with at the moment and exploring. And I'd actually love, if this is something that sparks something in you, like feel free to message me, hit me up in the comments here. I'd love to continue this conversation with you because I've been circling around this theme for the last year or so of feminine receptivity. And actually, we've looked at our receptivity. Like if you think of a power socket, the penetrative masculine and the receptive feminine, right? Like this is the nuts and bolts of our anatomy. We've looked at our receptivity as a weakness because men have inserted themselves into us in all these physically, energetically, intellectually, financially, like they've taken and exploited from us. And so we feel wounded by that. But actually, our receptivity is a huge strength. And I think we're at this tipping point now. And the work that I'm interested in doing is tipping this balance between the genders where we each remember the divinity within us. And I think as women in our intimate relationships, we have this incredible power to invite our partner down and into the truth of his heart through our openness, through our softness, through our receptivity. And when we can do that, it's almost like guiding men home with love, because patriarchy wounds men as well, right? It tells men that boys don't cry and that if you want to be in power, it means you have to be strong, and being a man means you're cut off from your emotions, and the more aggressive you are, the better. And I know so many beautiful heart-centered men where that just doesn't align. It doesn't align with the truth of who they are. So I feel like the ball's in our court, if you like, as women. And this is edgy and it feels a little bit triggering. It feels triggering for myself as well, but I can't see a truer path right now where if we can invite men in to the truth of their hearts through our receptivity, hopefully we can guide them back to a more healed, more divine masculine space, rather than throwing rocks at them from the outside and clamoring for change. And I'll do another conversation on this because it's a much bigger topic to expand. But as women, if we can start with our own bodies and reclaim our softness and our vulnerability and our receptivity, if we can learn to hold ourselves in all of this, then we can learn to hold the masculine and to invite him into a new way of being. From a tantric perspective, the feminine yearns to be full, right? Shakti is the fullness of life and energy. She's the all of everything. She's everything that is manifest. And the masculine yearns to be empty. His pure consciousness, his stillness, his presence. So if the feminine yearns to be full and the masculine yearns to be empty, there's this beautiful energetic exchange where we are pulling him in energetically. And for the masculine to be met with a woman, and most female leaders are strong, right? Like we're strong. That's why we're in leadership positions. where there's this softness and this invitation to step into his heart and to be in this very vulnerable space of intimate connection. But there's also a strength there where she has a strength, and he knows that she can hold all of him. All of his masculine expression is welcome, and she can hold it. That's an incredibly powerful combination. And this is true in the bedroom, and it's true in the boardroom as well. Obviously, what you're doing is different, but the energetic behind it, this interplay of strength and softness, of masculine and feminine, it's the same energetic principle. Again, if you're interested in diving deeper into this topic of vulnerability and how you can learn to harness it as a leader, I have a 3-part training on my website, madelineeliza.com/leader. This is a series called The De-Armored Leader, where we look at vulnerability, we also look at embodiment, and we also look at polarity. So 3 kind of pillars of what I call de-armoring, which is relevant for the individual within our own body. In the training, I explain where this term comes from and why I'm using it here. But it's also relevant for us as leaders to move from this place of kind of brittle, contracted, distorted masculine leadership where we're buttoned down and we don't show our emotions and we're just in control and we get the job done, to this more balanced, more open and expansive, de-armored leader where we bring in more of the feminine, vulnerability and receptivity, and we don't totally discard the masculine either, but we just rebalance and harmonize it within ourselves and within our teams. And the results that you get from that are much higher performing teams, stronger retention, stronger productivity. There's so much research into the power of these psychological concepts that I've been talking about here today. So thank you for joining me. We have gone from Heidegger to Brene Brown to sacred sexuality. I would also add that the kink space can be a really powerful way to play with these energetics. And this might sound like strange leadership advice, but it can be really liberating as a woman to play in the field of BDSM. I'd leave that as a little parting note. How we do one thing is how we do everything. And I feel quite bolshy about reclaiming female sexuality as part of this conversation around female power. In fact, I don't think we can have a conversation about women in power and female power without including a conversation around female sexuality, because we have been conditioned for centuries to hide our sexuality, to carry shame around our sexuality. It's original sin, right? Eve and the apple. It doesn't belong. It doesn't belong in the boardroom. It sort of belongs at home, but only in this very small window of the bedroom where it's allowed to come out. Your sexual energy is your life force energy. So when you learn to tap into that and to channel it and to harness it, it's not about going to work dressed in a bikini and high heels. It's about reclaiming the fullness of who you are as a woman and letting that ripple out into the world and taking up space.